All
Yep,
right. It's
we're
recording. We're good. We're on there.
Who wants to go first? I'm assuming we're all just going to go through the 3 prompts each of us chose and then kind of discuss each other's ideas, right?
Right. Yeah. I think too, we're going to start on prompt 1. So we'll go through prompt 1, all of us first, and then we'll go into the prompt set 2, and then discuss it.
What's your name?
Just to throw it out there, I did prompt 2 and 3. Did anyone do the first option? Or I did option 2 and 3.
I did number 1 and number 3.
Beautiful. Okay. I did number 1 and number 2. So
perfect. So we can hit this from all angles, all 3 of them.
You bet. You bet.
All right. So let's start with number 1 then.
Cool. All right. So based off different models of skill analysis presented in content page 2, which aspects of which models do you currently use in your coaching or sports psychology consulting? Or in general, what model do you think you most likely use in your coaching or consulting? How is skill analysis practically applied to coaching or sports psychology consulting to provide evidence and support for your claims? So I'm an assistant strength and conditioning coach at a college. So, I mean, I kind of use the majority of all of the stuff from QMD, but probably the 2 main ones I use are motor development and motor learning, just because when you have, young 18, sometimes 17 or 19-year-old athletes coming into college who most of them have never touched a weight in their life, you're going to have to really break down some motor learning and development cues, not in terms of sport, but in terms of actual strength and conditioning. So motor development, the skill is broken out into segments. So, for example, one of the hardest lifts we got to teach is deadlift, just because everybody who has never touched a deadlift, in their life, most of the time, the first time doing it, their back's going to be pretty rounded and not that nice flat surface you want to see. So usually what we do, kind of segment portions of the lift, so the pull and the pull through, how they set up for it, how they engage their lats, if they engage their lats at all, if they pull their shoulder blades together, if they're too far up the bar, whatever it may be. So for motor development, the main thing we do is we just break it down into segments. Motor learning, once they get that pattern kind of hammered into their biomechanical portions of their brain, their body, and whatnot, we'll start going through motor learning. We do cue a lot. We'll say, bring your hips through, bring your hips through, bring your hips through. There's a lot of times when they pull the bar up, the upper half of their body will still be kind of slanted forward just a little bit, enough where the bar is kind of pulling them down. So we say, bring your hips through. We'll try to also cue them on, think about doing a kettlebell swing, or think about doing a hip thrust, and we'll kind of get that kind of ingrained in their heads where, it's similar to this movement. So I'm going to think about this portion of this exercise and apply it to this portion of the deadlift. One thing we do for squats is I'll tell kids, we'll use box squat to kind of start off with, but I'll tell kids that, all right, when you're sitting back, the first movement needs to come to your hips. And they're kind of like, what? And I'll have to show it to them. I'm like, think about sitting into a chair. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. When you sit into a chair, your hips are going back first and your knees are going to follow that pattern. Whereas if you just kind of squat, a lot of times they'll just go straight down, their knees will jam forward, their hips won't go back too far. So we'll really hammer in sitting in a chair, and we'll try to do a bunch of different things that's going to apply to stuff they do in everyday life. That way they're kind of like, oh, it's similar to this or it's similar to that. Environment, a lot of the guys that we have just like having music blaring. So, I mean, we'll put music blaring so they're kind of getting that attitude, kind of getting that rhythm, kind of getting that mindset to be able to do stuff correctly and be focused on what they're doing. Then we'll give them feedback for everything as well. We'll say, okay, you did this well or you did that well. Let's work on this more, or let's really hammer this, or you did, like I said, you did really good on this portion of the lift. Good, let's keep it like that. And we also use videos to record our stuff a lot as well. So for the squat, I usually do a side angle because I'm very much a believer in keeping the bar over the midfoot as you're going down. So if you guys have seen people do squats from the side, the bar usually stays right in line from where it starts at to the midfoot and doesn't shift too far forward or backwards. So I'll say, okay, if the bar is going too far forward, think about sitting your hips back more, or think about getting your chest upright just a little bit more than what it is, and then we'll have them do it again for a couple sets, and they'll see from that point, like, oh, okay, that makes sense. I see where you're coming from. I'm going to try this more. It feels more comfortable, whatever it may be. But I mean, those are probably the only 2 that we really use. I don't think we dive too much into the pedagogy model of a lot of this stuff. Maybe some stuff here and there. That's probably where the video comes into play. But out of all the pedagogy stuff, video is probably the only one that we actually do. So I mean, a bunch of my claims to support is going to come from practical application, what I do in day-to-day life or work. But yeah, that's kind of what I got for that.
Right on. I got a question for you. So you were talking about segmenting, and so it sounds like you work with like a pretty good deal of athletes, like a number of them at a time.
Yeah.
When you have like a brand new, like you said, the novices coming in, are you take a segmented approach every time, or would you be like, give them a few pointers and be like, okay, do the whole movement, do the whole deadlift at once, and then you'll kind of address it from there?
Right. So what we usually do, especially for incoming freshmen, those first 2 to 3 weeks is going to be more like learning how to move right. So we'll do that every time. We won't focus on weights. We'll do barbell stuff. If we have to add weights to the barbells, then we add a little bit just so they can get kind of progressed a little more as they go. But for the most part, those first, like I said, 2 to 3 weeks, sometimes 4 weeks, depending on who we have, we're just going to focus on movement patterns. We're not really going to focus too much on, okay, good job, you're lifting this much weight, we're going to increase next week. We're going to really try to hammer in getting those patterns to look efficient. That way, when they do start loading the bars up, they do it the right way and they don't hurt themselves. So.
Right on. Do you, in the video analysis, how much time do you like have to sit down with them and be able to kind of analyze their squat or their patterns or whatever?
It just depends on when they come in. A lot of times when I record a video for them, I'll, have them go through an entire set of what they're doing. I'll record a whole set for them. And after doing that set, whenever their partner's going or they're waiting to go to their next exercise, I'll pull them aside like, hey, look at this real quick. The bar's going too far forward. Think here's that more. Okay, cool. Thanks, coach. Got it. And they'll go back in and do their next set. And while they're doing it, I'll be there next to them, like, all right, remember, hips back, or deadlift, hips forward, whatever it may be. Any of the ones who kind of need a little bit more help with it and a little bit more discussion on what to do right, I'll pull them aside after their lift if they don't have class. Or I'll tell them, hey, whenever you got time before class and before practice or after class and before practice, come see me and we'll kind of talk a little bit more about what we can do to help you out some.
Gotcha. So it's like an instant feedback for them. That's nice. I like that.
Most of the time it is, yeah.
Nice.
My question for that would be for your environment. Have you guys ever thought about not letting them listen to music?
We have. So I should have been a little more depth in that. When they're actually going throughout their lifts and getting like later on into the year, when they start learning how to move a lot better, to try to get them in the mindset, we'll leave that music on. But kind of to initiate stuff, if we're talking or if we're explaining stuff, we'll turn the music down. We'll have it completely off. We'll walk everybody through everything that we're going to be doing for that day. And then we'll start turning the music up a little bit. So it's kind of like, all right, pay attention, listen to me. This is what we're going to do. Look what I'm going to do. Does that make sense to everybody? And I do that for a lot of my athletes too. I'll explain something and I'll ask them, hey, does that make sense? Do you guys understand? Is there any questions? And if nobody has any questions, I'm like, right, let's get to it. If they have questions, I'm like, okay, what do you have a question with? What don't you understand? And I'll try to cue it a little bit better or make them understand a little bit better by, like I said, practically applying stuff that they usually do in everyday life. So they're like, oh, that makes sense. I get it now. And then we'll start turning the music up, just getting the mindset for everything.
The reason why I asked that, and that makes sense what you're saying. I've worked with a bunch of different strength coaches, and it seems like there's two schools of thought to it. Music, it enhances motivation, things like that. But I've read some studies where, if you play rock music, well, then there's people who only like rap or country, and so they won't get the same motivation.
Right.
And then there's other things where if you don't play music and you and I are partners, you might be more focused on the actual lift because you're not thinking about the lyrics of the song or whatever. And then me being a spotter, I'm going to pay more attention to you. And then also for a team bonding aspect, we're going to have to talk.
Right.
So I just didn't know if you guys had thought about that, because it kind of blends into the psychological portion of it with motivation, and then also, the team bonding aspect of it.
Right. A lot of times we do. So I have a Spotify playlist, and we kind of share the account over to college where I work at. We actually have a playlist that has everything on it. So like I said, some guys like that heavy yelling stuff, rock, 5-finger death punch, stuff like that. I listen to that stuff and I lift. It helps me out a little bit, but I'm pretty well rounded. I can listen to multiple stuff and be fine. We have some guys that are like that as well. Most of our guys are like that. But we also kind of just test stuff out. So every so often, it's like, okay, how did this lift go? What might have been influenced? What music we're listening to? Was this team listening to hip hop and rap? Was this team listening to rock? Or this day, let's flip it to see how they respond the next day for stuff. And we'll kind of just vary stuff like that. So we have multiple playlists on the Spotify account. That way, whatever team's coming in, we'll play stuff that we know is going to kind of trigger them more to really get after that day. But for the most part, we use kind of a generalized playlist that has everything on it. At least where I'm at, the majority of people don't like country, so that's great. So we can take that out and not have to worry about that at all. And I don't know who can lift the country, to be honest, but that's just me. But
I grew up in Southern Ohio. That's all there is.
I'm in Western Maryland and West Virginia, so I mean, my buddies listen to that all the time growing up. So I mean, I can listen to it. When I'm working out, I gotta have a little bit something more upbeat. But like I said, we just use kind of a generalized playlist for most of our teams. That way, everybody kind of gets a mix of everything when they're doing their lifts. So.
Okay. Now, Craig, you also answered number one, right?
I did, yes. So, little background. I work with mainly general population. I've had experience in the past working with in a strength and conditioning setting. That's kind of the goal for me. I want to be a strength and conditioning coach, but right now I do general population personal training at a private studio in Denver. And it's basically what I do. I was looking over a bunch of the models, and I take from quite a few different models. I think the biggest one that I took from was the McPherson one, which is there was like a pre-observation that you do, where it's like kind of a movement analysis and a plan observation. And then from there, we have an observed response and then a desired response. And then you kind of diagnose from there. We look at the errors in the movement, primary and secondary, and then I would kind of basically do a hierarchy from the errors that I see in these movement assessments that I do with my clients. And then, because oftentimes I don't like to overwhelm initially with because oftentimes I'll get people that come in that just cannot move properly whatsoever. So if I tell them if we do a squat analysis and I see, 10 different discrepancies on them, I'm not gonna be like, hey, this, and this, I need you to fix it. We'll go through maybe one, maximum 2 or 3 little different portions, and I'll break it down and try to help them with the movement. And that's where the remediation comes in, kind of that form adjustment. I don't do a lot of heavy video analysis. I think I can attribute it to lack of time, but we do 30-minute sessions with these people, and I see them. Most of my clients I see about 2 times a week, maximum some 3 times a week. And so like you were getting at, Brandon, we'll do some video analysis where it'll be kind of a immediate feedback where I'll be like, hey, this is what you're doing wrong. We'll take a side view, maybe a front back view of a squat, and I'll have them fix their form on the spot. But oftentimes with people, it's kind of like a real-time feedback. I'll try to get them into patterns that are just very fundamental movement patterns. Your squats, your single leg stance stuff, your pushes, your pulls, and then I try to break it down from there. Oftentimes I don't necessarily even use video analysis. We'll just I'll cue them, and it usually works out pretty well that way. In terms of motor development, I kind of looked at it when I was coaching young athletes. Last year when I was doing a strength and conditioning setting, I was coaching a lot of young athletes, and it's tough to coach young athletes because they're just not quite developed into their bodies yet, these 8, 9, 10-year-olds. And so I was seeing how that whole body approach versus segmented approach with the young guys, and I noticed that kind of going with a whole body approach. And they're having them just focus again on fundamental movement patterns and just kind of looking for these biomechanical checkpoints and, making sure their knees don't collapse in and they're moving well within their bodies. But there's certain times you just kind of have to let the athlete or let your client do their movement and then make some small adjustments here and there. But if you tend to overanalyze and try to, cloud them with information, it's going to do worse than much better, if you know what I mean. Yeah. Looking at the pedagogy, I always have trouble with this word. The pedagogy analysis. I use the hypothetical deductive in the pedagogy, which is where you analyze the differences between what you first observe and then you compare it with your desired outcome. So basically, we never know who's right because everybody has like different anthropometrics, right? So, a squat for one person can look completely different for another. And so basically, I like to get a vision in my mind. I watch videos, I look at people's techniques, and I try to see different body types, and I'll basically try to use that. That's the mold I have in my mind. That's kind of the analysis that I'm going off of. And then from there, I'll basically go, okay, so I've seen someone with this kind of body movement, like their general makeup. I've seen someone like that move before with all the clients I've trained. So what should a squat or what should a bench press, what should a deadlift look like for this person? And using that kind of like that preconceived information that I've already established, I'll use that. I'll look at them and I'll kind of set a pattern and be like, okay, I need them to fit a certain sequence, and then we'll kind of move on from there, and then do some coaching strategies after that. But yeah, that's basically the biggest thing I have for that. I was just reading this. It was an article on gymnastics coaching, and it was talking about how taking a who, what, where, when, why, and how approach with coaching your athletes. And I think one of the biggest takeaways I took from it was always establish like the purpose behind the skill that you're trying to teach, right? So like, it's like if you're teaching someone to sprint, or if you're teaching somebody, the squat, what's like the reason for doing this? Are we trying to build force development, right? Are we trying to get somebody to move properly better within their body mechanics? And right. And so it was basically like, who's the person demoing this approach? I thought that was really important. They talked about like the demonstrator and who's demoing this basically, because you want somebody that can move properly, that has the right mechanics, and that, because if you're taking, maybe the coach is the one demoing, right? But if you have somebody that doesn't do it properly and then you have them demo for that particular athlete, they're not going to be able to get the right mechanics down. And then I think it's really important, like, where the setting's happening, the type of environment you're in, just like you mentioned with, what kind of setting. Are you in the weight room? Are you out in the field? Is there music blaring? What's the atmosphere like? What are the conditions outside or inside? And then the how, basically how will the athlete know that they understood the movement? That's a big thing for me. Like if I'm coaching a client, I'm like, hey, here's the squat, this and that. And I go, did you understand that? Did you get that? And most of the time, especially dealing with young kids and people like that, you'll say, yeah, no, I understood it. And they're like, oh, did you really? So you're basically want to, instead of saying, did you understand the movement, or say, okay, why don't you demonstrate these 2 or 3 concepts back to me? I want to see if you really actually took what I gave to you. And I just found that really valuable information, kind of taking that who, what, where, when, why, how approach.
Yeah, what I took from, or the follow-up questions I have from what you point out, it pertains to motor learning and the pedagogy. Basically, if you have a client 2 days a week, I always find that hard because I have my trainees 5 days a week. And so you can really reinforce stuff over and over and over, where if you only have them 2 days a week, how are you getting them to, do you think that's enough to, if you see them on a Monday and a Friday, are they going to remember? Is that enough time? See what I'm getting at?
Yeah, and I totally see what you're getting at. And it's a really good question, because one of my guys I saw today is, he's a typical like a Monday, Thursday guy. Basically what I do is I drill movement patterns. So we'll start off like, usually I don't get many advanced people, but the people coming in I'll basically put them through, like, I want you to be able to do, a push-up, a squat, a pull, or, a hinge type movement, pulling. So, rows, pull downs types, and then we do some carries and various things like that. So basically like 5 or 6 big movement patterns, I'm going to drill that into them. So we're going to be doing a ton of the same stuff. It's going to become repetitive. And, oftentimes clients will think, it may be like quote unquote boring, right? Because we're just constantly working on these movement patterns. But, this is what builds quality strength and quality movement efficiency, because all the people I deal with, the biggest thing with them is trying to stay healthy, but also trying to limit injury. How many people do you see that, they throw out their lower back from picking up groceries, or, just like simply walking up the stairs? So I'll explain that to them in our first meeting. I go, listen, I'm my expectations wise, we're just going to get good at these really, really basic and fundamental movements. and then I'm going to drill them into you. And then as we progress and move on, we'll go into some variations, but they're going to be so good at those fundamental patterns that we'll be able to progress well. So yeah, I say 2 times a week I'd say 3 times a week is ideal for me. For an ideal general pop client, I like to see that. 2 times a week can be done. We do a total body, both sessions working on those patterns, like I said, but you're absolutely right. Like 30 minutes, like I see them for an hour a week. I can't control what they're doing really outside of seeing me, right? So they could be messing themselves up, without my guidance. But, we do what we can with the time we have.
Exactly. And you actually, sorry, just one more follow-up question, Brandon.
Okay.
And you actually kind of touched on my second question, was working with general population. Like, you can have the focus of a 30-year-old who needs to lose weight, and they are really gung-ho about it because their doctor told them to. And so by doing what you deem maybe boring, because I know teaching form and technique can be boring, how do you change that so that a 9 or 10-year-old can focus enough, because they have the attention span of a gnat? And so how do you drill those things to a 9 or 10-year-old who their goal is to look cool?
Right. That's a seriously good question. Like, my experience with working with young guys and gals too, it's like their attention span, they don't even have enough attention span to get 10 reps on a goblet squat. Like, I was working with a group of them, and I remember my mentors that I was working with, they're like, Craig, you just got to have them kind of move in a pattern. It's really about, keeping them moving, because kids like to have fun. They like obstacles, they like games. So I actually really like for new beginners, kind of incorporating, I guess you could call movement style games for them that are kind of teach them agility, proprioception, and balance and things like that. But in terms of actually getting them to do some weightlifting, it's really a matter of hey guys, this is what needs to be done. It's almost impossible to be able to biomechanically explain a movement to a young kid. Like, hey, this is why we're doing the goblet squat, this, that. They're not going to listen. So we'll have them do, a particular movement, and they'll be like, okay, in between, I want you doing, a set of this. Keep them moving in a progressive fashion in a circuit, and just kind of, because as long as they have a stimulus going, they're having fun, their heart rate's up.
Right.
That's what's going to keep them motivated and kind of looking cool, if you will.
Yeah, I had a group tonight actually for my other job, a bunch of 9U baseball kids, and they're like, hey, we're gonna do goblet squats today. We got a hammer squat pattern, blah blah blah. Trying to explain to them, they're kind of looking at me, they're like, can you go lift a 100-pound dumbbell? Come on, guys, pay attention. I'm pay attention.
Right.
I'll try to tell them if I'll do that if you listen to me and do this. So they're like, okay, cool, I'll pay attention, I'll do my stuff, and I kind of do what coach says. That way I can see coach, go lift one of the dumbbells, wherever it is. But one of the questions I have for you, Craig, only having a client 2 times a week, I also work, I have 3 different jobs, so I'll also work in a commercial gym. We have the fortune to actually have for an hour, but I have my clients 1 time a week. So what I'll usually do with them, and this might be something that I'm not sure if you touched on or not, do you actually give them homework that they can do by themselves over the course of when they're seeing you? So like I said, a lot of clients I have, they know that most of my time is going to be taken up over at the college as a strength and conditioning coach. I'll tell them, hey, I'll text you 2 workouts throughout the week. The first couple of sessions is a little bit difficult because they're kind of what is this? What is this? What is this? What is this? So I'll send them video demonstrations of, obviously people on Google, look it up, but I'll try to find the most efficient looking image or video that I can find on YouTube or Google and send it to them and say, this is how you do it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'll send them that so they can do stuff 2, 3 times, maybe even 4 times out of the week by themselves. And then they'll come see me again that Monday, and they'll have those 3 days by themselves where even though I'm not there with them, they have that motor learning and motor development stuff still going on from what we did in our previous sessions. I'm not sure that's something you do. But that's something that I do that I found actually works very well, because they, like I said, they continually are doing something even without me that's going to help them in the long term hammer down those movement patterns in their body, used to what they're supposed to be doing, how things feel.
That's a great point. And I didn't touch on that. And I will actually want to. I also want to get you guys' take on it, because I do give homework. That's part of the part of the gig. So yeah, I'll see them. Oftentimes, especially if I'm getting a new client and they're brand new to training, 3 times, if I'm seeing them 3 times a week, that's usually enough. So I'll have them do some, what I call practice on the side, because I want them learning the movement mechanics, like you said, that, that motor development. in motor learning. So I'll basically say, hey, you know what? I want you to do some cardio on the side, you know, to help. And in practice some of the movements we do in the gym, you know, practice your goblet squats, practice this and that. I think it's a little tougher with certain general population versus athletes, because athletes kind of see a common goal, whereas it's very difficult sometimes to pull it out of the general population to get them to think about this as a practice. They're trying to get better at these movements to help kind of accelerate them towards their goal. Here's where my question I'll pose to you guys is, because I'm curious, when you present homework, I have a ton of clients that, you know, when you get somebody and you're like, you know what, I just don't, you know, they don't move that well. They're super novice. And you're like, do I want to give them homework? Kind of being a little bit worried that they might injure themselves. I don't want them, you know, to do something when I'm not watching them. What do you guys feel about that?
Well, for me, I deal with police officers. So I mainly train police officers that are in an academy. So I don't, you know, I have them 5 days a week. I don't really have homework, but I've just now started getting into older police officers. And we are a very stubborn group because we feel like we know everything. So I kind of trick people almost into practicing. So if like Brandon was saying, you know, do cardio on the days when you don't see me. For their warm up, you know, you have them do flexion extension and certain things like that, but then I'll also have them do 10 body weight squats and that, or 10 push-ups or something. And I put in there, keep in mind your bench form, you know, scapular retraction and bear claw into the ground, or with body weight squats or even a rack squat. I'll tell them to look in the mirror when they do it and keep in mind where your knees need to be and things like that. So just having them doing it as a warm-up, they think they have to do it before the cardio, and it actually helps them practice the movements.
Okay.
I would kind of agree with Randy. I mean, I kind of do a lot of similar stuff like that as well. Like I'll kind of hammer in within the warm-up, hitting on those movement patterns that they will be doing within the workout. But for like the clients I have when they come in, you know, you mentioned like, oh, you know, are we worried that like they might hurt themselves? When I send them their workouts, generally starting if they're brand new with me, I would kind of base it around a lot of the cable machines. That way they can actually use weighted loads without having to put weight on their back or go through a lunge, you know, body weight. They can do, okay, you know, stand in place. We're going to do standing split stance lunge or standing split stance squats, whatever you want to call it. So you're still getting that lunge pattern without moving with it. Or if I'm like, okay, we're going to work on some rowing, I'm not going to be there with you today, whatever it may be. So instead of doing dumbbell rows, that's a little more complex for somebody novice that I'll be working with them one-on-one. I'm like, we're going to do cable row. I'm like, so it's the same thing as dumbbell row, but you're not in that 45-degree parallel position to the ground. You're kind of standing up. You're still in that pulling pattern. You're still getting that rowing pattern. I'm like, but it's going to be a little bit easier for you to do by yourself for right now. So you start getting used to these patterns. And then usually as things progress, I will start sending the more complex stuff to do. So, I mean, I've had a guy at the commercial gym that I work at for the last, 5.5 months. And when he first came in, I was doing stuff like that. So I'm giving some very basic patterns to follow, some movement patterns that are, you know, cable machines or some basic dumbbell stuff you can do. But now to the point where I'm texting, I'm like, all right, you know, you're going to do 4 sets of box squats a day. You're going to do a set of 6, a set of 2, and you're going to do heavy singles, and you're super set out with like band pull aparts and then planks. Whereas if I would have sent that to him on like his first week, he would be like, I'm not paying you money anymore than you want. So I mean, it's one of those things where you, even when they're by themselves, you still have to progress it like you're going to be there with them.
Right. Okay. Gotcha. So you're kind of like, yeah, and I do a very similar thing. Like you're going to start them off in very kind of quote unquote basic movements so that they can learn how to recruit the proper muscles and then kind of progress them to a point where they can start doing that little more load, a little more taxing on the body. Got it.
All right, let's move on to number 2.
Number 2.
Who else did this?
All right. Describe a plan of how you might document or determine the validity of your analysis of an athlete's skill performance. Then what could be another approach to determine validity if you have no financial or time restrictions? Did anybody do this one out of us 3?
I did this one.
Okay.
Randy, you haven't talked to, you want to talk about this one?
Oh,
first?
yeah, that's fine. So this one was a little bit shorter. I should say, I don't want to say easy, but I'm lucky that I work in Columbus, so I have Ohio State right close to me. It's actually 3 miles from our training academy. and I did a year-long internship there, so I know a bunch of the coaches. So if I have something that, you know, is bothering me where I just don't think, or I'm not confident or something like that, I will either use a video of an athlete doing a movement, or I've actually had a strength coach come into one of our training sessions and just help me have another pair of eyes. And then moving further along, if I had all the money and time in the world, you know, I would utilize things like a high-speed camera, or like Dr. K put in the overview, like a dartfish type program where you can map out certain things. And then I would actually, you know, like I'm 6'7". So for me, doing a deadlift looks a lot different than, you know, someone who's 5'6". So I would take an athlete that is similar to the one I'm working with and show them, okay, overlay maybe another athlete doing that. And also keep in mind the skill level of that athlete. Like, even though I'm 6'7", that's the same height as Brian Shaw, or the Mountain. But they are a very different training level than what I'm at, even though I've lifted for 16 years. It's their job. So, you know, taking consideration a similar athlete of build and skill quality.
Beautiful. Can we talk a little bit about that, Randy? I know, at least what I think I know about police departments, there's not a ton of funding that goes into training programs whatsoever. So I'm actually even surprised that you have like as much as pull as you do with the people you work with. So what kind of resources do you have access to, like technology wise? You said, like, in a perfect world, are you able to, you know, take some of your guys and gals over to Ohio State? Are you able to bring technology from there in or?
Okay, so without getting totally into the weeds on this question, the world of tactical strength conditioning is trying its best to go from, you know, what they did in the 80s and 90s of just calisthenics, push-ups, sit-ups, mile-and-a-half run, like militaristic style of PT, into more of functional movements for a long career. So we, up until last year or 2 years ago, we were that go out, run 2 miles, do a bunch of push-ups, do a bunch of sit-ups, and that's your PT session every day, 5 days a week. And so we don't have a lot of equipment. I use a gym. And when I say gym, I mean like a basketball gym. We have very little equipment, some kettlebells, some dumbbells. And so it's a lot of figuring out how to be successful with that. We don't have deadlift bars. We don't have racks. We don't have benches, nothing like that. So how to accomplish our goal in that aspect. So if you're talking about video equipment, no, nothing like that. The best I have is bringing a coach in to see what we got. And I had one of the coaches come in, who's been there at Ohio State for 28 years and look at what I have and give me some ideas and things like that. So that's why I said in a perfect world, it'd be nice to have all that stuff, but it's not. And then on top of that, with police world, it's a lot like military, where it's very traditional based, like everyone's rooted in tradition. So they don't like new things. So I was very lucky to have the freedom that I have to do what I do. And it helps having a tactical strength conditioning certification and a background that I do. So
I can kind of follow up on that as well. So at the college I work at, we have a police academy. I'm sure most community colleges are going to have some type of cadet academy for their local city police force. They actually use our gym a lot. So a bunch of the older officers that are kind of leading the TV stuff when they're in there, I know one of them went to college, and he might have graduated a year before I did when we were both at Hagerstown. And he has his basic personal training certification. But him having that kind of gives him some validity and some reliability amongst the older officers. Like, okay, you went to school, or not even went to school, but you went to school to do some type of stuff for physical education, and then you got your certification. I don't think he does it that much with them anymore, but like when they're there and I'm there, a lot of officers are asking, hey, are you, I think a couple of weeks ago, the guy's like, can you, go ahead and put stuff up on the board? Because we have huge whiteboards. He's like, can you put stuff up on the board for 2 days a week when they're not with us? I think come in here and do some weight stuff. So I can understand that a lot of times it's harder for them to get the resources that they need. So having me readily available for them on the go in the morning, especially nobody's there, because from 7 to 8 a.m., no one's in the gym. It's just them for the most part. So he's like, hey, can you write a workout? Or hey, can you change the workout for this week? Or whatever it may be. So them having that resource, like I can understand where you come from with them, with you guys not having a lot, because they have to rely a lot on us to help them with that training that they have for their PT stuff. So you can definitely tell that in the tactical world, they are trying to transition to the aspect of making it similar to what you're going to get with actual athletes with strength and conditioning coaches.
Right on. Now, Randy, from a coaching perspective, how would you say the limited aspect of equipment and just resources altogether has made you better as a coach?
Oh my gosh. So the first thing is the fact that every one of our classes, we had a former Ohio State football player in the last class, and then you'll have your 34-year-old that's never touched a weight. And so designing from a program design standpoint, you have to teach the masses. I mean, you got to teach the middle, and be able to do things in a way that you're challenging both of them. And so that in itself has made me a better coach, but also just they have their state tests they have to pass for push-ups in a minute, sit-ups in a minute, mile and a half in a minute, or timed mile and a half run. And then also for our troopers, we have to do 1 rep bench press, one rep leg press, body fat, and flexibility. So I have to do things so they pass that test, but then, my main goal is to make them the best decision makers. So I have a lot of mental PT sessions where they do things in the PT session to get them thinking and making decisions. Numbers grids that they have to transpose to another number grid, but they have weight or certain training exercises they have to do in between to keep those numbers that they memorize in their head and things like that. And so it's really we can't go in there and throw around a bunch of weights, but what can we make them better at? We can make them better decision makers while also making sure they pass those tests.
Love that. Oh, nice.
Because that's what a police officer's job is, making decisions under stress and under fatigue, and that's what a training session is: stress and fatigue.
100%.
Would you say that's probably harder than actually teaching them the physical aspects of what they're supposed to be doing? Is teaching them the mental capacity about to do stuff? It's like you said you could have 34-year-old person who's touched weight in life compared to the Ohio State former football guy. But even if you have any athlete, you can have some athletes that come in that are, on top of the world, but they don't have the mental edge. But the guy who's 34 might have the mental edge and then have not great quality when it comes to actual PT testing. So is it difficult to kind of find that middle ground, even including the mental edge of everything that you kind of have to help them with it?
Right. So what I found that works best for us is, again, without getting too far in the weeds on program design, we usually will have them, do, I don't want to say circuits, but somewhat of a circuit. So they'll do an exercise for 30 seconds and there'll be a certain type of weights there. If we're at the beginning and we're really working on muscle endurance to get their bodies to be more resilient, if I tell you both to do push-ups, one of you might be able to do 30 in a minute and the other one's going to only be able to do 10, but you're going to work for that 30 seconds. And so a job of mine and the other instructors in there is to make sure for that 30 seconds those people are working. Mm-hmm. So yes, you might be a football player that can bust out 30, but make sure the 30 good ones and you're working for that entire 30 seconds to push yourself to your through your mental wall, because everyone has a different one. And so that's our aim with that, to make sure that, because we had an Olympic hockey player that played at Boston College. She won a gold medal for Team USA. She was just in this past class, and she could have loafed it, but she worked her tail end off. And so it was, I always kept an eye on her to make sure she was working, but she always worked hard. And so it's just making sure that everyone is pushing themselves to their max.
Right.
Right on.
And that's why I found that if we just say go out and do 10 push-ups, okay, 10 push-ups for somebody is going to be really easy. 10 push-ups for somebody is going to be really hard. So if you don't give them a specified number, you make sure they work for that time.
Right.
Like the intent of the exercise. Right on. Right.
Next one. Go on. Next one.
Yeah, next one.
Right.
On the same, we're in the same topic. Because I'm gonna jump in real quick because I did this number 2 as well. Right, that's where we're still on the validity thing.
Yeah.
I want to throw in just a couple more points, but then we'll move on. Because I was using kind of an analysis back to like kind of a strength and conditioning environment. So like you had said, Randy, I kind of start like on a logical plan, like kind of, you know, how we were talking about when you're assessing a movement, you want to get like a highly respected coach's perspective, or you want to get your information down where you're like, okay, I know this movement because I've learned from it. I think we should take a note too. I mean, we have so much access from like really highly respected coaches now. Like, you know, we think about like 20 years ago, there wouldn't have been, you know, anybody around, but now we can learn from some of the best, or what we perceive as the best of the best, which I think is just highly critical in being able to master our craft and be able to kind of share information. So that's kind of how I go about, you know, assessing a movement and getting this type of advice. And then with no like financial time and limits, like I was working at a facility last year that we did a lot of NFL combine testing, right? So we actually got to use force plate technology, but we also used a lot of Tendo units. Have you guys ever experienced with those?
Yep.
So those where you're doing the velocity on the barbell, and you'd be able to so you kind of analyze in real time too, because basically we'd have these athletes squat, right? And we'd put an iPad in front of them, kind of set up, and you could see your velocity, your power output per rep, and you can even see the depth of the movement as well. It's kind of an appropriate depth. So having this kind of real-time analysis, not only does it give the athlete immediate feedback to kind of understand the movement, but it's also kind of provides a nice competitive environment for the athletes too, because you put them on the bar and they're seeing that their velocity is at a certain point. The next gal gets up there, they're like, wow, you know, I'm going to produce that same result. I'm going to be better than that person. So it has a kind of a performance aspect to it. So I think that's kind of something a little missed that we don't take into account. It's really good to get this real-time results, but also creates a really good atmosphere for the athletes.
Right.
Yeah. Ohio State football, they use Tendos for a ton of stuff. They have computer screens in every one of their racks. So when they're doing squat, when they're doing bench, like for bench, they'd put a 45 on each side, and then throw the Tendo unit on there. And then you go up and wait, but you have to maintain a measurement of 1 above 1.0 for every rep of 3, 5 sets of 3 on touch and go for bench. And so, you know, then it's a competition. Well, how much weight can you put on and still maintain that velocity in that area, or in that bracket that you want to keep it in. So yeah, it's really nice to have that technology.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have access to it to our workout. But when I was in Salisbury and Marine Track, we had it there. And what the strength coach staff did it then. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Matt Nine, but he's really big up in the NSCA. He won coach of the year a couple years ago in Division 3. So you know, he knows what he's doing. He's a very smart guy. He got Tendo units one year. I think he's had them for a while. But when I was there, we did it kind of like squat jumps. So we had the bar set up kind of like on the plyo boxes. But we weren't into full squat. We were like, all right, you know, you're going to just kind of jump up. It's kind of more like a vertical jump, I guess, from a quarter squat position. But he's like, all right, you know, we're going to see out of all the teams on campus who averages the best out of men's and women's. So we're kind of like, we got to win. You know, like the lacrosse guys were beating us, and we were very close to beating them. We're kind of like, you know, they're multiple-time national champions. If we can beat them, we say, hey, you know, we're better than the national champions for average velocity. It kind of gave incentive for everybody kind of. Like you said, Craig, we work really hard to kind of push each other and make each other better, which even though it's going to give me a competitive environment, as a school for multiple sports, that's going to be good for the school in the long run.
Absolutely. So, yep. And I have this one too. We would use these timing gates, if you will. Like we were doing a 5-10-5 testing, or you're doing like a sprint analysis, get a 10-meter, 20-meter dash, whatever. And but the good thing about those is they kind of do your incremental time. So if I'm doing a 5-10-5 with an athlete getting ready for a combine test, we can, like, if we match that with a video analysis, we can see like the direct angles the athletes are taking, and then see, okay, well, this is where you kind of, your cut was the angle on the cut was like too large or too small here. And then we can make those real-time adjustments just based off that video analysis and seeing their actual times, which is good.
Yep.
Yeah. We've been pushing to try to get 10 those where I'm at. So far, no luck, but we're going to keep trying.
Good luck. All right. Should we move on to that next question?
Number 3, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Can inter-rater reliability be as good as intra-rater reliability? Why or why not? Describe how inter-rater reliability and intra-rater reliability will be practically applied in your coaching area of interest, or sports psychology consulting. I did this one. Did anybody? You guys did this?
I did as well.
Okay. I can go ahead and start if you want me to go ahead and just kind of get it.
Yeah, go for it.
So I put down that I think inter is going to be a lot better because you have multiple coaches there at the same time. So having multiple eyes at once is going to be a whole lot better than having just you. Not saying that having just you is not going to help at all, but in the long run of things, that's going to help the athletes get better. You want to have multiple coaches there to kind of see what's going on. So if, we're testing the 60-yard dash, especially for where we're at, we don't have any of the timing belts. We have to use stopwatches or use our iPhone. So we'll have all 3 of us time, and we'll see if we get close to it. And if we're all in the same time range, right? Okay, we're pretty close. This athlete probably ran this, but if one of us is off by a lot, we're kind of like, what happened? Did you click it too slow? Did you click it on time? And we'll kind of figure out what's going on with that. I think intra-rater reliability would be good, like I said, if you are the only one there. So if you don't have anybody else to rely on, you're going to have to rely on yourself, and you're going to have to trust your instincts and trust that what you're doing is the right way to do things. But in the grand scheme of things, I believe inter-rater reliability is going to be a whole lot more beneficial than what intra-rater reliability is, just because when you have multiple eyes seeing stuff at the same time, you're going to have multiple results that they're going to kind of dictate what's going to happen. It's going to kind of help you figure out if anybody's in the same track of thought process and all that stuff.
So instead of, let me just throw out my response to that, and then we can talk about it, because I actually kind of have a different point of view than what you're putting out, because I just looked at it from a different aspect. I think if you look at inter and intra, you got to look at, it depends on who the coaches are, right? And what kind of coaching philosophy they have, or what kind of skill and knowledge they have. If you have a bunch of coaches that are of like mind, then yes, it's good to have those eyes on there. And I use the squat, for example. If you look at like the NSCA, they say what? You should put your feet shoulder width apart, right?
Right.
Okay. At Ohio State, you got a lot of athletes, football-wise, that have long legs. And so they teach to have a wider stance.
Right.
And so if you have people from both parties, OSU and NSCA, both looking at the same person squatting, that's where inter can be could be a detriment, because now you're going to have different people arguing over what's the right thing to do.
Right.
Or you can have it where you have 2 coaches that are really knowledgeable and 3 coaches that aren't as knowledgeable. Well, you're just going to end up relying on those 2 that are knowledgeable, and you're going to get drowned out. You're not going to get to speak your mind or what you think, may be right. And so you just got to look at who you have in your groups. Where intra, I look at how knowledgeable are you. It can be better than inter if you are the master,
Right.
Guy, and you're confident in your abilities. But those are just the questions that I pose with it. But in my we kind of talked about it. I'm the only guy really that has any idea what's going on in my place. So I rely on intra a lot, but
Right.
I make sure that I know what the heck I'm talking about if I'm teaching something, and I use a lot of people for inter outside of my organization to help me with that.
Right. I think that's definitely going to come from differences in how we train and where we're at. Like I said, you're the only guy there, whereas me, I have 2 other guys with me, and we're all like-minded. So it's different perspective where we're coming from. There's definitely merit to both of them. So it does get kind of hard to say what is truly better than the other. It's all just going to depend on probably environment, like you mentioned.
I know the text had said that, it says like in research studies that the intra tended to be better than the inter because of just like different protocols that people would follow, like you said, Randy. What I'm curious, I was going to ask a question that you basically just brought up, but do you think it takes basically, say you're working with a bunch of coaches like you're doing, Brandon, do you guys get together before you make, you know, any sort of decision, or do you have an assessment protocol where you're like, okay, we all have kind of a standardized look at this. Everyone knows that these are the type of squat parameters we're looking for, you know, or certain checkpoints, just so you guys are all on the same page so that you don't come back from an analysis and you're like, okay, well, I saw this, but then you're like, well, no, that's fine. That's, you know, that's because of this variable or whatnot.
Right. Yeah. So where I'm at, we do have a standard that we all do our best to follow as close as we possibly can. It's me and my boss more so than the other guy we have. Not saying that he's anything wrong, but he's just more kind of his own. He likes doing his own thing for the most part. But there is a standard that we all do follow. Like, okay, you know, squat needs to look like this, depending on parameters of athlete. Like Randy mentioned, if you have long legs, and you know, it is more beneficial to take a longer stance so you get deeper into that squat. Whereas somebody who's 5'5" can take a pretty narrow stance, be able to get deep into the squat perfectly fine. So it's going to depend on the athletes that we do have, but we do have a standard that we kind of teach for all the athletes that we do have. And we want to try to see, even if, you know, somebody's stance is longer or shorter, we want, you know, everybody to get depth. That's something that, you know, the majority of coaches are agree on. Like, a squat is on a squat unless you're 90 degrees or below, or parallel or below. There is time and place for, you know, core squats, half squats, depending on whatever training modality you're doing. But when we're actually teaching barbell back squats, we want to be able to get to depth. And that's something that we kind of have a standard on. Like, you know, wide feet, if it's going to help you get depth, do it. Short stance, help you get depth, do it. So
love that. So that's actually a really good point, because you're basically saying like you guys may have like kind of like different vision on like certain checkpoints of the movement, but when it comes to like a key variable, like you're saying, like the depth, then like, you know, if it all comes together and you see that depth, then it looks proficient in your eyes.
Right. And a lot of go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and a lot of that depends on who you're training. And it goes back to exactly what Craig was talking about, the who, what, when, where, and why. I played basketball. There's in a sport where knee injuries are plentiful, and you spend the majority of your time on the basketball court in a quarter squat defensive stance, it's more beneficial to make sure that they are at you know, that quarter squat. They don't need to go down to a full squat. Yes, you know, to get the full range of motion and power and blah, blah, blah. But when they spend most of their time, you want to train them in that quarter squat.
Right.
So, but like for police officers, they sit in a car and their first movement is stepping outside the car. That's a full squat. We do full squats.
Right.
It's actually funny because I remember I was seeing, have you guys ever seen the video of LeBron James doing a barbell squat?
Yes. Yes. And so, people made fun of him for that.
Exactly.
And I'm reason for it.
Right, exactly. And I was going to say, because when I was like kind of a novice trainer, it was a few years ago when I saw it, and I was like, I immediately wrote it up, and I was like, well, that is just the worst squat I've ever seen. Right. And then, but he's got some long levers for this guy, and he cannot get down to a level of parallel without really compromising his back. And so then once I kind of got the biomechanical variables and I kind of did my own research, I'm like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. You know, he's a basketball player and he's going into this quarter squat because it's proficient for him. It's his type, his body type, and his type of movement. But I remember seeing that, and he got a ton of backlash for it. His trainer, people were like, what is this coach doing? And, you know, I just think it's pretty fascinating.
Okay. So,
all right.
I think we hit that pretty well. Let's go on to prompt 2.
So you guys didn't do 4 or 5, right? For the first one?
No, I think, I did 1, 2, and you guys did 1, 3, right?
Awesome. Yep. Okay. Just want to make sure.
Beautiful.
Yep.
Prompt 2. I did the first one.
So did I.
Provide some evidence, video links, websites, blogs, research paper of a typical error in a sports skill of your choosing. Explain how and why the biomechanical concepts of this module apply to these errors. How can performance be enhanced through the application of biomechanical concepts? Then describe strategies, drills, activities that you can create to enhance the application of the biomechanical principles to facilitate performance. You want to go ahead and go first if you want, Randy.
Okay. So I read an article by Kevin Ford and others that was titled Valgus Knee Motion During Landing in High School Female and Male Basketball Players. So the reason why I chose that one is, especially for me, as we talked about having, some people training age of 0, when you have them learning how to squat, looking at that knee valgus or knee collapse is really big. And especially, we don't do a lot of cutting as police officers, but, trying to figure out and share with them the dangers of that knee valgus. And what I learned from this is, and the other reason I did that is because I do have mixed group. We have female police officers, we have male police officers. So what they found from 2 different tests, and basically the test that they did for them was a drop jump. So they step on a box, they jump, they drop down, and immediately explode straight up in the air. And they looked at the knee valgus and to what degree. And I don't know how well versed you both are in ACL injuries, but females tend to tear their ACLs more than males. Mm-hmm. Well, right. Their explanation for that is what they call ligament dominance. And so in females, the female actually showed more of a ligament dominance. And what that is an inability to control the torque of their joints in their lower extremities. And it usually leads to knee valgus. And with that, as I said, they tested with the drop jump. And so when they would get down to, the landing portion of it and try to explode back up, they have a decreased control in their frontal plane. So they can't control their knees from going in as well as a male can. And then the greatest risk of all injuries for ACLs is in the eccentric quad movement paired with knee valgus. So if you think about coming down off of a jump for a basketball player coming down from a rebound and have to explode back up, or, even for a cop getting pushed off balance and having to explode forward for a takedown, the eccentric movement of that quadricep, and then their knee bending in, trying to explode forward, that's when you're going to be at the biggest risk for ACL injury. And they also found that females show more valgus in their dominant leg compared to their non-dominant leg. So how I just kind of explained how that affects us as police officers. And then, when we're teaching lunges, and Brandon, you brought it up, how to teach that movement of lunges with split squats and things like that, but really look for knee valgus and making sure that if you look from on front of somebody, watching their toe and their knee and their body all keep in the same line and not come in. And then also watching for their dominant leg. Another way we could just test that is have them step off of a box and see how they land. So that's what I came up with for that one.
Yeah, I could definitely relate to having when you're trying to figure out the injury that can occur through incorrect biomechanical errors when you're doing stuff like lunges. A lot of stuff we do where I'm at, we will watch them when they do lunges, and we would tell them all the time, toe straight. Everything we do, except for squats, because your toes out might be the best. But right. Everything we want to try to do is if you're doing deadlifts, try to keep your toe straight. If you're doing lunges, try to keep your toe straight. If you're doing split squats, try to keep your toe straight. We always want to try to reinforce that, keep your toe straight, keep those knees out. And then we'll explain to them, the biggest deterrent in your sport, which I work primarily with softball and baseball. The biggest thing that's going to help, that's going to be prolific in your sport, thing that's going to happen the most is going to be ACL injuries. So we're trying to get you guys to move the right way. We're trying to stress the ligaments, the joints, the tendons, and these multi-directional planes of motion by doing these certain movements that are going to put stress on the muscles that are surrounding the tendons. That way it's getting strengthened enough to that point where you don't have to not worry about it, but the risk of it's going to be severely decreased from if you guys were in there doing anything. So the whole foot straight thing, I can 100% agree with you on that. Everything we try to do, we want your toe to be straight as possible.
Right. The thing that I came up with that is 10 straight. Your 10 toes are straight. So I need to see 10 facing me. But the reason why I chose this article, I talked about how we had that Olympic hockey player. She had to leave the academy early so that she'd go to a gold medal, dinner or whatever.
Right.
And so she was she killed it through her training the whole time. And now she's 32 now, so her hockey days are kind of behind her. But, you know, she's been trained at the highest level. Well, they get into their final exam for self-defense, and they have to go in an all-out fight. I mean, it's controlled, but it's, you know, as safe as possible. But the very beginning of it, she went to take somebody down, and he pushed her away. She took one step back. That eccentric move tore ACL.
No kidding.
So it you know, that's, everybody was like, she's so well trained. She said, and I try to tell them that females are more apt to tearing their ACL. So I was like, I want to kind of look into that. And so I came up, you know, I read this. I'm like, makes a whole lot of sense. So
Right.
Randy, was that something that you noticed during her like preliminary training? Because you said this was afterwards, the self-defense thing. So did you notice any sort of discrepancies in her movement that may have led you? No? Interesting.
None. She,
really?
I'm telling you, she killed, like, and she worked her tail end off, was like a leader in all the PT stuff. Yeah. It was like, I find myself, and of course it's a female, and what's the worst thing you can do is to stare at a female during training. But like, I'd find myself being mesmerized because she is just so fluid in everything she did. Like,
right.
She was like the pinnacle of everything you teach. It's like, she would be the perfect example. So like, I'd find myself watching her do these things because in my head, it's exactly how it should look.
Right.
And she's got, I mean, she's an Olympic athlete, so she's got like an elite level performance level for sure.
Yeah. That's just one of those outliers where like, it's just a freak accident. I mean,
exactly.
It happens. I mean, everybody gets injured like that. Like, you can do everything you can, but if it's just one of those freak things that happen, no matter how strong you are, it's going to happen.
Right.
Everything
and that's why I try to explain to our higher ups, ask all these questions. I try to explain to it. She is the best trained person that's ever come through here. You can't train an injury out of everything.
Right.
Absolutely.
All right. So for mine, I actually did deadlift and biomechanical features for all that stuff. So the article that I had found didn't really get too much into what the let me get the video up real quick. Didn't really get too much into I guess not errors, but it kind of gave more efficient angles that you should be at when you're doing the deadlift. So a lot of times what we'll see is when athletes are deadlifting, or anybody deadlifting for that matter, the first thing that goes up is their hips. And when their hips go up, that's when their trunk shoots up, and that's when they're lifting all back. A lot of that's going to have to do with just how strong you are and how much the bar weighs compared to how strong, like I said, you are in the beginning. But a lot of people, like you'll see everybody teaching deadlift a certain way, where like, okay, we want your back and your neck parallel to the ground. We want to have you coming straight now. Whereas some people are kind of like, we want you to be close to a squat position, like you would be in a trap bar deadlift. The angle that it kind of found was one that was kind of right in between. So about like I think it was 130 degrees. Let me find it real quick on here. Yeah, I believe it was 130 degrees, 120 to 130 degrees was like the most proficient angle you want to have. So it's not quite that, 45 degree, but it's not quite here. It's kind of like right between. But they developed the most force from that when they were pulling the bar, and it came out that a lot of that is also going to have to do with core strength and if you're engaging your lats or not. So that was from another article that I found. That was off the stack. So I kind of compared two articles where I wanted to try to find the best angle that deadlift came from, which this article did. Let me get the name of it real quick for you as well. Biomechanical analysis of the deadlift by Michael McGowan.
Now, do they touch on different body, like who did they test in that? Did they did they have tall athletes, short athletes?
It didn't get into the height of them. It just kind of compared sumo to conventional, and I'm going off conventional for right now. Because we know sumo is going to have to be more upright as you're doing as well. But it was average body weight was kind of the only main thing that it did. So both groups are similar in body weight and load lifted. The sumo group had an average body weight of 83 kilograms and 218 kilograms, whereas conventional lifters weighed an average of 84 kilograms and went to 215. So it didn't really get into too much of the height, just more what the angle is going to be from that hip joint up until your knee joint that's going to be the most proficient. Like I said, they found that being between that 120 and 130 is going to be the most proficient for what it is. And then I went in and try to figure out, okay, if that's the best angle, then why are athletes or individuals that still are in this angle have that shooting up at the hips when they come up? Kind of like if you're in this, so-called perfect position for deadlift, then what's the reason that you guys are still rounding your backs when you're pulling the bar off the ground? Which weightlifted is going to have to be a factor into it. But that's where I just typed in Google on like errors in deadlift. And one of the ones that came up was on Stack, Stack magazine, whatever. But it did give good points that say whether it's flat or neutral, when we refer to either of them regarding the back positioning while deadlifting, or any of the for that matter, spine does not have a natural kyphotic curve in the upper spine and lordotic. That the two main things that are going to help fix that rounding of the back is you want to have tension in your core. So a lot of times when I'm teaching the deadlift, I will tell my athletes, we do a lot of supersets as well. So what they're going to superset with their deadlift is going to be some type of isometric core work. So your planks, your payoff presses, your hollow holds. That way that core is firing and ready to go. So nice. I always try to tell them, all right, guys, before you lift the bar, bring your shoulder blades down to engage your lats. I mean, if you bring your shoulder blades together, you're shortening your arm length, and you're pulling the bar further than what you have to. Whereas if you're pushing your shoulders down, your lats are engaged. So if you're doing a lat pull down, you're pulling straight down. Same motion, except your hands aren't up, they're down. So once your lats get engaged, that's going to put that tension across your thoracic spine, your upper back, and your lower back to keep it in place. And you're going to brace your core like you're about to get punched in the gut. So I try to tell them all the time, I'm like, you guys, we're probably all in fights, when you were kids. I'm like, you got punched in the gut and you didn't brace your core, it went in, it didn't feel good. I'm like, if I'm about to come up to you right now and I'm about to, sock you in the stomach, you're going to tighten up real tight. I'm like, that same feeling you're going to do, you need to do when you're deadlifting. And a lot of times when I tell them to do that, I'm kind of like, okay, cool. They do it and it looks a lot better than what it did. If they're still rounding lower back, that's just going to come with some accessory work that's going to help them. So a lot of stuff we can do, some drills and stuff that I typically do with my guys is if they can't pull off the ground, I'll have them do an elevated deadlift. So we'll use blocks, we'll use some of the bumper plates, and we'll have them pull a little bit further. If they still have some difficulty doing that, we'll do some reverse hypers. We're going to get your lower back strengthened. That way your lower back can maintain that load you're pulling. We're going to do some RDLs. We'll do some stiff legged deadlifts. That way you get that hamstring strength to maintain that weight as well. We'll do some upper back work. We're going to do a lot of pulling. The stronger your posterior chain is going to get, the stronger your deadlift is going to be. Mm-hmm. So a lot of it's going to be, even though the angle might be perfect, if that is rounding is still happening, that's where you're going to have to start addressing certain, different drills you want to factor into it, like pulling from blocks, doing some reverse hypers, doing some supermans, doing some stuff that's going to strengthen your posterior chain to help that deadlift in the long run get stronger. I can say for me personally, deadlift is my personal favorite exercise. I love it to death. The heavier I got to go, or the heavier I have been going over the course of the last 2 years, it's because I've incorporated a lot of back work. So I do that with a lot of guys. We're going to do some pulling stuff because if you have that strong posterior chain, it's going to help you deadlift better, and it's going to help you do a lot of your other lifts better as well. So.
I love that cue that you said there with bracing the core, like you're getting punched in the gut.
Yeah.
In terms of carryover, top 5 cues, that's probably one of my biggest cues because you could use it for just about anything. You're bracing for the squat, the bench. It doesn't matter. Just hey, you have to get punched in the gut, tighten up. You know what I mean?
And a lot of times what I've done, even I wouldn't say I do it a lot, but I have several times gone to some of my guys that kind of open hand, pop them in the gut real quick, and they brace up, or they start all right, maintain that, and they'll do it. That feels a lot better.
Right.
I volunteer at my high school every so often that I went to. But my teacher there, history teacher now, is a strength coach there, and I was telling the guys, all right, I'm gonna teach you guys about South technique. And I'm try it when you guys are squatting today, and they did it, and they were looking at each other, and they weren't talking to me, but they were looking at each other, kind of that feels a lot easier. Yeah, your core's braced, but your spine's not doing this thing. Your spine's actually stagnant where it should be when you're doing heavy lifts like that. You're gonna lift heavy loads, the stronger your spine is, the stronger your core stays.
Mm-hmm. Create that
cushion. I think a big thing with deadlifts, it's just that bar position. How close they keep to their body. That's big on the back.
Yeah, I'll try to teach my class too as well. Scrape your shins. It's not going to feel great. Yep. But you'd rather scrape your shins and have your back do one of these things. So.
And the basketball player in me is no scraping shins. We're going to use a hex bar.
Yeah, we have one hex bar. So
exactly.
I am subjected to teach a straight bar deadlift. So.
Right, and I'm just saying in the long-legged basketball player in me, hex bar.
Hex bar is a lot better. Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. That's amazing. All right. What was it? Last thing. So I did question 3. If we want to move on to that.
Research an article analyzing the biomechanical principle from this module in a sports skill area of interest. Provide a link to the research article. How does this knowledge apply to coaching or sports psychology? I could ask that question 3 times. How does knowledge that you did for your article apply to sports psychology or coaching?
Right. So I took an article off of Simply Faster. I don't know if you guys use that blog at all as a resource, but it's fantastic. So highly recommend. Cameron Joss, he's one of the performance coaches, like one of the main performance coaches that works at DeFranco's gym out in New Jersey with Joe DeFranco. Highly reputable, mechanics coach, just great with, field performance and athlete performance. Anyways, he just wrote an article about sprinting in team sport, and he basically illustrated the butt kicking epidemic, if you will. I don't know how much you see. Yeah. So basically, there's kind of oh, you're a sprinter. So yeah. I have this problem with myself. So I recently started sprinting a little while ago, and I would do some video analysis on myself, and I had this exact problem. Basically, I was leaning way too heavily forward, and I was kicking my butt way too high, which inherently isn't necessarily bad. It just has to be, your center of mass has to be in the right position for you to get that range of motion so you can apply the force correctly. So basically, took some notes here. He basically said the butt kicking was exhibited by an excessive arching of the back, or usually the upper back, and you have kind of an interior pelvic tilt, kind of like looking up this way, and your head's tilted as well. And that's heading into the touchdown phase, and basically too much forward lean at the wrong time, because you're basically, when you're going into your full acceleration, maximum velocity, you want to have a pretty upright torso, a small amount of lean, but mostly an upright torso, because that's what's going to create that maximum vertical force pushing into the ground. And then basically the heel strike in front of your center of mass during the stance phase is what's happening, and your heel is colliding with your butt from behind, and your center of mass is off balance, so you're kind of distributing that force improperly. And what's happening with that, it's creating a ton of hamstring injuries. And so his article, basically, he kind of went over the analysis of talking about, why improper sprinting mechanics are important in field sports. And then he took through 3 archetypes, the excessive forward lean, and talking about that, and basically how you can remediate and do drills to help, cue the athlete to get them to, apply the appropriate mechanics or apply the proper force distribution in the sprint. He alluded to this Altus Kinogram method, which is like a video analysis program. It was pretty interesting. I've never actually heard of it, but it was like a kind of like a live, it looked like almost like a dartfish, where you get the angular kinematics, and you can see the biomechanical angles and everything within the video. So I thought that was pretty cool. But basically, you want a good upright torso when you're in that maximum velocity phase. You want a good neutral pelvis, and then the leg mechanics basically have that big front side lift, which is you're kind of you're punching that knee up, trying to create that vertical force. Now, I don't have a ton of experience in sprinting, but I'm really always fascinated by it, because I just think it has so much translation to all sports to be able to sprint properly. And I just don't think there's not enough premium put on it. I think a lot of coaches will focus more on sports specific drills, or their agility or change of direction training, where more of their athletes need to be focusing on that linear acceleration and getting proper movement mechanics in sprint. Because at the end of the day, if you can apply force directly into the ground and sprint proper linearly, that's going to carry over tremendously to the way you position your body in agility, jumping drills, even weightlifting. The way you could put force in the ground in a sprint could carry over to how you power clean. So, stuff like that is really important. And so he kind of went into some pretty solid detail on that. What's kind of I want to go back to the notes a little bit, because he made, what he went over. So Cameron was good because he was really into the motor learning process. So he he cued his athletes to be able to get them to kind of experience what he wants them to do, that proper leg lift, and to be able to kind of distribute the force properly, like we're talking about. And he had two big cues, and actually a drill that he did that I was pretty fascinated by. He had one athlete that he told that they told him that he wanted him to imagine that he was running up a set of stairs that kind of goes to infinity, into the horizon. So if you can imagine that, like think of like a stairway to heaven that kind of never ends, and you've got to lift your legs up nice and high to be able to get stair after stair going kind of vertically up. And so I found his his cueing technique pretty fascinating, that we could kind of use, that has good carryover. And then he said, he's like, my stairway to heaven analogy didn't work for the second athlete who was having trouble with the same issue. So I told him, I want you to imagine that you're running through a pit of hot coals, right? And that you want to put as much force as you can to the ground, but at the same time, you want to be able to sporadically, come up as fast as you can. So you're applying force after force, but then coming up quick so you don't burn your feet. And so he had a couple of like really interesting techniques that I would definitely be able to use. He also used this method, and tell me if you guys had experience with this. He had them hold a medicine ball in front of them, maybe 5-10 pounds, something pretty light. But if you think about that interior tilt, if you put a med ball in front of the person, you kind of get them more into a neutral position. That weight will act as kind of a counterbalance. And he had that athlete practice his hip mechanics by basically punching up his knee to hit the ball while simultaneously running. And so he used these drills as well as these cueing techniques to incorporate that. And he had like a before and after approach where he had them, this first analysis, and then he took over and had them do these drills. And after a few weeks went back and, practically cleaned up their mechanics. So I just find it fascinating how in this realm, like certain cues don't work for everybody. Everybody's different. Everybody has different life experiences that you're going to have to pull from. And so that's why it's really important to know and be able to gauge your athletes. And then just kind of like his biomechanical analysis, he brought it down to like the most, bare bones, and like really trying to just work on small little mechanics that will help them with their hip drive or their force application.
Right.
For sure.
I can definitely say that I used to be a bucketer when I first started sprinting in high school. But when we had a coach who he came in as I want to say I think he was a national champion. He was an All-American for a Division II school, but he came in and he said, we're gonna transition our warm-ups. Instead of doing butt kicks, I'm having you guys do something that's called heel to hamstring. And we're kind of like, okay, cool. It's kind of like a mix and a high knee. So he's like, think about having a screw that's through your hip and a screw that is through your heel, and having a string along those two screws. He's like, what you're gonna do is you're gonna bring your heel right up to the butt. So it doesn't give you into that full high knee position, but it's not butt kicking. So your heel is kind of coming up like this, and your knee's still staying forward. So you're getting that kind of turnover a little bit like you're pawing the ground as you go, which will transition more into the high knees. And when I was in college, a lot of the drills we did were more focused on bringing your heel up. Like if you want your heel to go straight up. If you have it go this way, you're not having that velocity and that acceleration carry over how it should. Once you have that force coming up, it's going to be easier to apply it this way instead of having it go from here, then to here.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the drills that we definitely did was more bring your heel to your butt, try to keep your heel kind of vertical you're doing. And then one common thing that everybody does is the wall sprint drill. Wall,
exactly.
Put your hands on the wall and bring your knees up, and you're going to have that drive where you're forward a little bit. I mean, you're used to having your feet going in this direction without having that circular pattern come around where you're dragging your foot behind you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
One of my mentors had said too, it's almost like your feet, you want to act as pistons, especially like you're kind of going up and down and trying to pop, like through the ground. That was a really big image for me when he taught me that one.
If you guys are members of the NSCA, there's a really good video. It's about 50 minutes long. One of the strength coaches at Oregon had this presentation at one of the conferences about deceleration, agility, change of direction, speed, all that stuff. And it's funny that you bring up, Craig, that this article talked about the upper body and how important it is. Well, his was all about lower body. Everything for sprinting is lower body. And what he meant by that is everything's through your hips. We know that. But in order to get your hips right, you got to keep your knees always wider than your feet. And I was thinking to myself, like, what do you mean by that? So when your foot hits the ground, if you see somebody like a still shot of someone's foot hitting the ground, if their other leg is back here, you can see their feet are wider than their knees. So if your foot's hitting the ground, you actually want your other knee to be going like this, so that both feet are almost parallel and your knees are farther apart. And that is showing you're in the right mechanics. Your hips are leading rather than you're going behind, you're lagging behind. And so he gave a lot of different pictures and still shots in this presentation, and it was really tremendous. And he showed how, in a speed cut, in a power cut, the difference between the two of those and how your body is in relation, but your knees are always going to be wider than your feet. And I relate that even to, squatting. Even if you have a wide stance, where are your knees going to be? They still need to be over top of your toes, right? So your feet should never be wider. If your feet are wider than your knees, then you're going to have valgus and you're going to have issues. So it was really interesting to watch this presentation that he gave, and how much that has to do with, sprinting, where you're talking about the upper body. He was all about the lower body.
That's interesting.
But the reason why I bring that up is he also said the worst drill you can do is butt kicks.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So it was just funny that you bring that up, because that's the same thing he talked about. He's like, to each his own, but I've taken that out of my repertoire of warm-ups. There's much better things to do.
Oh yeah. Just reinforces bad mechanics. And Randy, on that point too, I had a note here that Cameron had talked about in the article, and he was talking about how you want to see it kind of at the ground contact phase, you want to see a minimal thigh separation. So like it kind of talk on that leg
knees,
point.
yeah.
Exactly, the knees, because it basically saying that you're going to have more elastic, ground contact, and create the more vertical force with that minimal thigh separation. So that's a really good point that you said there.
Yeah, I don't think I've completely removed butt kicks from all the moments ago. Usually the first day, because you'll have all these high school athletes come in who've done butt kicks for 10, 12, 13 years. So getting them out of that habit is a little bit difficult to do. But I'll tell them all the time, all right, we're not going to do butt kicks. And they're going to what? I'm like, we're just going to go over hamstring. And I'll explain to them. They're kind of why aren't we doing butt kicks? I'm like, all right, go downstairs on the track. Because we have never track. I'm like, go downstairs on the track. Run to 60 doing butt kicks. Tell me how fast you fall on your face. And they're kind of like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And I'm like, okay, doing this, I'm one of those things where you're going to have to get feedback and let them know why you're doing what you're doing, which is going to help that whole motor learning, motor development thing, even if it is difficult in transitioning somebody who's done something for the last 13 years of their life. It's a hard thing to get somebody to get out of doing, but it's just reinforcing the patterns that you want to have for anybody to train.
100%. In the police world, we call those training scars. How do you remove training scars? Well, I think we're about I think we're about an hour and 25 minutes into this thing.
Yeah, we're pretty deep.
Yeah, so I think we've covered a bunch, and we should probably save something for week 4.
Yeah. Probably. Yeah, we don't exhaust ourselves.
But good meeting y'all.
You as well.
This was very insightful, and I think we got a lot out of it. I think we definitely covered what we needed to, and went into it. Maybe for next time. I know it was really nice to have 2 people talk about the same thing, but let's talk earlier on in the week and try to cover maybe all of the bases or all the prompts.
I agree.
No, 100%. That'd be good, just so we have kind of a different approach to each thing. Yeah, absolutely. All right. For sure. Yeah, that was good meeting you all. I've really enjoyed these conversations. I don't get a chance to kind of elaborate and talk about, discuss in really deep depth here. So yeah, we'll keep it rolling week 4 and we'll get it going.
It's going to be very insightful to learn from you guys throughout the duration of the quarter.
And I'm pretty new to the whole world. I only started this 2 years ago. I've lifted for 16 years, but for 14 of those, I've done it wrong. So it's been, it's nice to learn from other people. I really went into the internship at OSU with an open mind because I knew nothing. So it's good to learn from other people because this internship was or this master's program was like the very first thing I ever did for strength conditioning. So I'm learning everywhere I go. I know nothing about kinesiology, biomechanics, or anatomy or anything like that. So I'm struggling along.
We'll help each other. That's what we're here for.
Help each other
Beautiful.
out.
That's it.
All right, gentlemen.
All right, I'm going to stop the recording. I'll get everything submitted, guys. I'll let you know when I take care of that.
Awesome. Sounds good.
All right,
Great.
guys. Take care.
Bye.
Yep.